The buildup came long before Operation Epic Fury began. F-22s were moved to bases in Israel in the Middle East. Tehran wasn't ready when the operation began. America's F-22s came to Iran like a ghost in the night unseen, unstoppable, a deliverer of massive destruction against secret bases, and now a weapon that the US can use as an ever-looming threat against Iran's struggling regime. This is what the F-22 has done in Iran, and it's massive. What we know about the F-22 so far in Iran is that it's one of the most forward-focused aerial assets that the US has deployed it. It's along with the F-35 as a stealth fighter jet. Though both have played different roles, you can think of the F-35 as the quarterback of the team of airframes that the US has unleashed, filled with advanced sensors. Those jets have been directing traffic and carrying out strikes against some of Iran's most dangerous military targets. As for the F-22, it's packed with sensors too, and they are important, but it has been the air superiority specialist, the jet that the US and Israel sent in to smash targets and dominate the skies over Iran. These multi-role fighters have been taking out Iran's air defenses and secret bases, all while supporting other airframes so they can do the same. The US plan worked. Iran's air defenses are in shambles. By March 30th, the Israeli Defense Force was reporting that around 80% of Iran's air defenses have been destroyed. It's no coincidence the first week or so of Operation Epic Fury was also the period when the F-22 was in the most dominant form of its strike mode. For days, these jets were flying in Iranian airspace, undetected by the very air defenses they were sent to destroy. Along the way, F-22s have been taking out secret bases, and the odds are that they played a key role in keeping the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, under control, but it's their contribution to the dismantling of the Iranian air defense network that has been their foremost achievement so far. Right now, the US has such a degree of aerial superiority over Iran that it's able to use the decades-old B-52 bomber to conduct overland missions. This wouldn't be happening if Iran had anything like an air defense network left. B-52s are huge and easy for modern defense systems to detect. The fact that they're flying all over Iran's mainland tells us that the 80% figure for Iran's air defenses that Israel shared is quite accurate. It might even be an underestimate. An F-22 has played a huge role in making this type of air environment possible for America's airframes. But that's not all. Now that non-stealth platforms are flying over land in Iran, the F-22s have shifted into more of a support role, akin to the one that America's F-35s played earlier in Operation Epic Fury. They may not stay in that role forever. The situation in Iran is close to escalating beyond what we've seen so far, and we'll be covering how F-22s will be involved in that soon. But for now, F-22s are flying around undetected in Iran's airspace, collecting intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance data. It has plenty of sensors that allow it to do just that. And this data isn't just being used by F-22s. They'll still be carrying out strikes against Iran's secret bases. Of course, however, the data that they're collecting is also being sent to older airframes, like F-16s, and the non-stealth bombers that the US has deployed in Iran. Think about what that means for Iran and the IRGC. It knows that F-22s are in the air, but it doesn't know where. And even before losing 80% of its air defenses, and the radars attached to those systems, it couldn't find them. Now those F-22s are collecting data on targets, which is then transmitted to other airframes, so they can conduct strikes, while the F-22 flies off to a new sector to collect even more data. This is a layered approach to airstrikes that have been made possible because the US developed air superiority so quickly, and the F-22 has been playing its part. Several of them, in fact, from the moment that Operation Epic Fury was launched. Worst of all for Iran's regime is that it can't do a thing about any of this. The F-22 can cloak itself at any time that it wants, allowing it to loiter within range of Iran's remaining radars without being seen. It can identify those radars and strike if it needs to, or the F-22 can use its stealth capabilities to pick out the many safe aerial corridors that exist in Iran's airspace. All that another airframe has to do at that point is head to where the F-22 tells it, then unleash standoff munitions that destroy targets left, right, and center, and targets are being destroyed en masse. The count for the US military in Operation Epic Fury is more than 11,000 targets hit as of March 29th, and the number will only climb higher if the escalation that we mentioned earlier actually happens. As for the IRGC, it and its leaders are living in a constant state of insecurity with F-22s flying overhead. This fighter jet is perhaps one of the most lethal examples of the technological edge that the US holds over Iran. For the IRGC, that edge is one of the reasons why so many of its most important figures have already been eliminated. Euronews highlights some of them. It says that the number of dead senior officials in Iran's regime had reached at least 70 by March 21st. Among them is Ali Mohammed Nayani, who was the spokesperson for the IRGC. His may not be the most important scalp in the world, but he was a key front-facing figure for the IRGC. Others who have died were far more important to the response that the IRGC was trying to mount against the US. The first day of Operation Epic Fury, which would have seen America's F-22s at their most active, resulted in the death of Mohammed Pakpour, who was the commander-in-chief of the IRGC. Since then, the IRGC has lost multiple officers, from the Lebanon and Palestine branches, as well as the cause former deputy coordinator Ali Hashemi. The senior commander of the IRGC Aerospace Force, Esmail Degan, has been eliminated, as have other officers linked to the IRGC but based in other countries. Did F-22s carry out any of these strikes directly? We can't know for sure, but what does seem certain is that they would have been supplying intelligence to the aircraft that took all of these IRGC leaders out, even if it wasn't the airframe firing the missiles and bombs itself. This is why the IRGC and its remaining members are so insecure, whether they know an F-22 is in the skies or not. The ever-looming threat is always there, and sometimes that threat comes from the most unexpected directions, all because F-22s can share so much data with other aerial platforms in Iran. When we say that Iran wasn't ready for the F-22's full power, we mean it, but the regime and the IRGC should have known what was coming. We've already covered some of the F-22's capabilities, which have made it a perfect choice for Operation Epic Fury. It's stealthy, and it has a dangerous combination of sensors and firepower. The US Air Force goes into even more detail, noting that the F-22 combines its stealth with a sort of maneuverability that makes it a nightmare to track and engage in the skies. This is a jet that can hit Mach 2 with super cruise capabilities, meaning it can maintain supersonic speeds without engaging afterburners. That would make it show up on Iran's radars. With a range of over 1,850 miles, the F-22 can also fly multiple times over targets before heading back to base. And when it comes to firepower, it has everything that it needs to destroy whatever is in its path, assuming it doesn't call in another airframe to do the job. An F-22 comes loaded with an M61A 220mm cannon, complete with 480 rounds that can shred through targets, like drones and unhardened structures on the ground. Internal side weapons bays can carry a pair of AIM-9 infrared air-to-air missiles. Not that Jet has needed them for anything bigger than drones, as Iran's antique air force has been a non-factor. AIM-120 can also be included for a devastating air-to-air package. For ground targets, the F-22 carries several munitions, including the GBU-39B small-diameter bomb, weighing 250 pounds. These bombs are precise enough to strike almost any target on the ground, and small enough to give the F-22 the option of hitting multiple targets, all without ever once breaking its stealth. If the F-22 isn't using those types of bombs, it can also be packed with GBU-32 Joint Direct Attack munitions, which weigh about 1,000 pounds each and can deliver immense firepower to a target when needed. All of this is publicly available information. The US Air Force has been practically screaming at Iran that the F-22 was coming and that it would tear through the IRGC's military infrastructure, but still Iran didn't see the scale of destruction coming. But it could have even without all of these specs. That's because 2013 revealed to Iran just how effective the F-22 would be if it were ever deployed in its territory. This incident alone shows you why this aircraft has been so effective. So, 2013, what happened? In that year, an Iranian Su-25, which is among the best attack jets in Iran's air force, despite being a Soviet-era relic, attempted to intercept a US MQ-1 Predator drone in international airspace. The Iranian jet failed, but the incident was enough to convince the US to send a message to Iran. It did it by deploying F-22s as escorts for its drones, which led to one of the most humiliating experiences in Iran's aerial history. The incident saw the US F-22 piloted by Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Sutterfield, escorting Predator drones. It wasn't long before his stealth jet sensors alerted Sutterfield to the approach of a pair of Iranian F-4 Phantoms. Again, these were great fighter jets in their day, but by 2013, they belong in a museum rather than in any sort of contested airspace. The pilots of those jets didn't spot Sutterfield's F-22, which prompted him to pull off a move that has gone down in legend. As the F-4s approached to intercept the American Predator drone, Sutterfield flew his F-22 underneath the incoming jets. There he idled for a moment, before he pulled his F-22 up alongside the Iranian F-4s and delivered the ultimate message: "You really ought to go home." Iran's pilots listened, and if the IRGC had been paying attention, it would have learned everything that it needed to know about its airspace. Right now, America's stealth fighter is the sort of technical achievement that none of Iran's defenses were prepared to counter. Operation Epic Fury has proven it. Thousands of targets have been hit, directly or indirectly, by this jet that Iran's radars and airframes can't detect. The US has gone from delivering cheeky warnings in international airspace to dropping bombs and launching missiles inside Iran. The IRGC can't do much about it beyond what Iran's pilots did 13 years ago. run away, hide, and hope that the F-22 goes away. The F-22 has been a standout during the first month of Operation Epic Fury. Now the question is, what will it do next? Here's where things get serious for the F-22s in Iran. So far, they've been conducting or supporting aerial operations. Targets have been destroyed, secret bases shattered, and stealth kills have been made over and over again. Now comes the escalation as we speak. The US seems to be preparing for a ground invasion somewhere in Iran, and F-22s will almost inevitably play a role. Two Marine expeditionary units, the 31st and the 11th, are either heading to the region, or in the case of the 31st, are already there. They'll be joined by power troops from the 82nd Airborne Division, giving the US around 6,000 elite soldiers in the region, along with the crews of the ships that are sailing them to the Persian Gulf. Those soldiers join around 50,000, who are stationed in bases around the Middle East, providing the US with a ground force, powerful enough to try almost anything, up to and including assaults on the Iranian mainland itself. The mainland doesn't seem to be the target, though. In a March 30th report, Al Jazeera claimed that a pair of unnamed US officials have said that the Department of Defense is preparing for ground raids against Kargil. This small island is home to an oil terminal, through which 90% of Iran's crude oil exports are processed. And the idea seems to be to place severe economic pressure on Iran to force the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas flows. The idea is simple. Take away the Iranian regime's main source of income, and you can force it to relinquish its grip on the moves. The role of the ground troops will be to head in, take over, and hold Iran's oil infrastructure for as long as is needed. It's a dangerous job. Those soldiers will be sitting ducks for Iran's missiles and drones if they don't have air support. That's where America's F-22s are likely to come in. These stealth fighters could launch attacks against Kargil's remaining military infrastructure, along with missile launch sites across the Strait of Hormuz coast that could target American troops on Kargil. We'll likely see American F-22s perform the same sort of supporting role that they're handling over the Iranian mainland. The US has Apache helicopters and a 10 Warthog attack aircraft operating in the strait. It isn't much of a stretch to assume that F-22s will be conducting flyovers of the strait, gathering data that can be used by Apaches, A-10s, and any other air power that the US deploys. That air power will support the Kargil island invasion by taking out drones, missiles, missile bases, fast boats, and any other threat that Iran can deploy. At least that's likely the plan. Kargil Island is still a very dangerous proposition, and thank you as always for watching. That's the case even with the F-22s in play. It only takes one missile, hitting the right spot to create a fiery death trap that leaves what some would argue are hundreds, if not thousands, of unnecessary casualties on America's hands. F-22s could soften up Kargil's defenses ahead of a ground incursion via massive aerial bombardments. The same could be said of F-35s. And if the US is confident in its air superiority, a host of other aerial assets that the US could deploy. However, it's also possible that Americans will turn their sights toward another target, the Strait of Hormuz coast. Specifically hardened targets along that coast, such as missile launch sites and ammunition stockpiles, could become targets for America's F-22s and their GBU-39 bombs. Precision attacks across the coast would go a long way toward minimizing the threat that the IRGC composed to the US ground forces on Kargil. They would also add to the damage that has already been done to these types of coastal targets by mid-March, which is when news broke of the US deploying 5,000-pound bunker-busting munitions against hardened missile sites. F-22s bring stealth into the equation, which will also make them difficult for whatever's left of Iran's coastal air defenses. To stop an IRGC soldier with a manpath isn't going to be able to do much about an F-22. The American fighter will be able to arrive, fire, and leave before that soldier could even get their shoulder launched. Air defense system ready? But perhaps the most important thing that America's F-22s can do, as the US prepares for ground operation, is to be the same kind of constant, looming threat that it has been over Iran since the beginning of Operation Epic Fury. Practically invisible to the IRGC, the jet can scan the coast constantly. Every missile launch attempted against Kargil Island will be spotted, and with data from the F-22s, have a large chance of being intercepted. Iran's regime also knows that its own troops won't be able to make any serious moves. Should the IRGC consider a ground-based counter-invasion, combine a naval blockade of Kargil Island with F-22s patrolling the skies, and you get a very low likelihood of Iranian ground forces making it across the short 20-mile or so stretch of water between Iran's mainland and the island that the US potentially plans to invade. And there's more. US President Donald Trump has threatened that the US will take aim at Iran's water desalination plants that would be a big and potentially dangerous step. The Independent notes that Iran has experienced acid rain and heavy smoke since Operation Epic Fury began, Desalination plants are crucial for cleaning up water, so it can be used and consumed, and attacking them would impact Iran's civilians just as much, if not more so than the Iranian regime and the IRGC. Iran is also dealing with a fifth consecutive year of extreme drought. The same outlet reports that some reservoirs in Iran are currently at about 10% of their maximum capacities. Attacks on these plants could create a major civilian crisis in Iran, which is the last thing that Trump wants, given that he has called on Iran's people to take back their country. Since the start of Operation Epic Fury, still the attacks could happen. And if they do the F-22s that have already devastated so much of Iran's military infrastructure, could again play a role. Iran may have focused as much of its air defenses as it can on these vital plants, but that won't protect it from stealthy F-22s. Should Trump decide to follow through on his threat? A lot could change before that happens, though. If the U.S. succeeds in taking and holding Cargill Island, attacks on desalination plants likely won't be needed. The U.S. would have economic leverage against Iran, which could force the reopening of the strait for moves. But whichever direction the U.S. goes next, its F-22s will likely be leading the charge. They've been doing just that since the beginning of the operation, and that isn't going to change. As the U.S. gears up for a ground invasion, as the U.S. moves into a new phase of Operation Epic Fury with its F-22s, Iran's Gulf neighbors are starting to strike back. Having been targeted by Iran's missiles and drones, they're preparing their own responses, which could leave Iran backed into a corner. As America's ground troops enter, find out how the balance of power in the Gulf is on the verge of changing in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show to keep up with our coverage of Operation Epic Fury. And thank you as always for watching.